So let's talk music with the man who has rocked a few boats in his time. Would you please welcome Pete Steedman? Welcome, Pete. Bitchy, backbiting and diverse.
Yes, could I just say on that the journalist rang me up when he ran that. It was done over the telephone. It was for a feature. It was cut into a news story. That comment, when we actually said that, he said, you know, there's problems in the industry. Look, it's bitchy, biting, divisive, just like politics, just like anything else. I mean, I'm sure in your industry it's bitchy, biting and divisive.
Yeah, so
it wasn't just picking on the music industry. Any industry that's got a lot of stress in it, high achievers, people going for very high stakes in it, always ends up like that. It's part of that lifestyle.
The $2 billion figure, though, I think would surprise most people when they think of rock and roll as just something that happens in the local pub.
Well, I think that people see it in that. We're talking about industry and what the industry means. You know, it's a sale of records, the manufacture of records, the people in the background. Like you're on camera and there's 50 people supporting you. That's
sure.
Similar with the industry as well. When you add it all up, the research done by the Australia Council showed 1.6 billion, and that was figures of over a year and a half ago. It's coming up to 2 billion now.
The Chief Executive of the Australia Contemporary Music Development Company. It's a pretty highfalutin title. What does it mean?
It had to have all those words in it because contemporary music is one thing. It's not rock. It's the blokes in the band here. It's orchestral music. It's jazz. It's country and western. So that's contemporary. It's a development company in industry, and that's the basis of it. It's to build the industry base. That is that the government goes into many areas.
So it's a federal government operation?
No, the government established it after negotiations with the industry and it's handed over. It's a totally private company, has nothing to do with the government, but it's got some government money in it. And it is to research the industry to find, at the moment there's a consultant out doing the training needs in the industry.
What would you do, though? Would you actually hand out money to bands?
Well, that's what's being said. No, not initially, because the major operation of this is a secretariat, which links in. The job of the first 2 years, is which basically why I'm doing it for that period, is to establish the networks, to establish the link in with the private sector, with the government, to training programs that the government's got. See, this goes into the Australian traineeship scheme that the federal government's got. You can have kids training to be technicians, electricians, producers, accountants. I mean, the major needs in the industry are competent managers and people like that. There's so many bands that aren't getting a real go because there's people not trained in managerial status at that level.
Are they ripped off as bandies, we read?
Well, I suppose there's always a percentage of that. Some are, but I don't think a lot of it's not done purposefully. It's done through ignorance. It's because the people who, you know, you might say, I've got a band going and you get your mum or your dad to be the manager. Now, they have no competence whatsoever, and when you reach a certain stage of competence, they can't handle it anymore. You put yourself at risk of not being able to succeed to where you want to. The horror stories that come out of the people who've been in the industry many years are of some of the biggest names that we've heard, and they've risen and they've disappeared, is not because of their music, not because of their talent, because of their management.
Well, how are you going to change it? I mean, $2,000 million a year industry. Why you? Why have you got the top job?
Well, when they advertised for it, and I applied for it, and I got it.
Easy as that.
It's as simple as that,
right.
On that basis. But I think...
It wasn't jobs for the boys, an ex-Labor MP?
Well, I think that's very difficult when an independent board that most of them would be of a different political persuasion than me voted unanimously to do it. But I think the reason is that I had been working with the government, establishing many of these things, the Austrade. It's the seminar they had in Sydney with the Export Music Australia, with Tom Noonan coming over from the States to tell our people what it's like over there. All of those things have been really come from an impetus from the federal government and Minister Dawkins in particular, who I've been working with, and so I have an overview of the industry that probably no one else has. Doesn't mean I have a great knowledge of it specifically or where it all goes, but I have an overview of industry as against culture.
What could you do, though, Pete? I mean, in terms of export dollars, what could ordinary Australians sitting out there watching this, what could they expect if we grab it by the throat?
Well, already that line's been now picked up by Export Music Australia, which has come from an Austrade panel, but things such as the bands can now go over and they have access to the trade commissions. There are tax concessions. There are things that have been changed to take the bands, to take music industry into its overall encompassing bit. I mean, if you're a businessman and you want to sell some product, you could be treated very well in many countries by the Australian government. If you're a musician, up until now, I don't think you've been treated all that well, but they now have the same status as normal people.
As normal people, eh? Even though they're rock and rollers. Now, how much? Right. What are we talking about? How much have we made out of in export dollars?
Well, in export dollars, the statistics from Austrade showed that in 1985 it was worth $8.5 million to the Australian economy. The current figures coming from Chris Gilbey, the chairman of Export Music Australia, he says it's over 80 million. It's going up to 100 million this year. So that's in 3 years from 8.5 to 100 million.
But we have to thank Midnight Oil and Kylie and...
You've got to thank, I mean, it's got nothing to do with... Look, let's not muck around. It's got nothing to do with the government or these impetuses. The things we're talking about will impact a few years down the track. It has to do with, that's exactly right, In Excess and Crowded House, Midnight Oil that are over there at the moment, Ice House, Kylie Minogue, all of those.
When do you think, how far down the track, we're just about out of time, but how far down the track are we going to see some sort of results for this?
Oh, we're already seeing it. Already we've made representations to the government and had a 20% tax anomaly lifted, which would have crippled the Australian industry. Already it's working. I don't take up the job for a month. We'll basically be up and running by February of next year, but we're also still doing things in the meantime. So already we've saved, in terms of that representation, vast amounts of the Australian industry from going down the chute.
All right, rock and roll gets serious, or music gets serious, eh?
Music gets serious. It's not just rock and roll, it's all contemporary music.
All right, thanks, Pete. After the break,
thank you very much, Ray.
Jeannie Lewis.